Bible in a Year Live Chronological Project, Week 7, Day 3, The Message. That completed the work of the dwelling, the tent of meeting. The people of Israel did what God had commanded Moses. They did it all. They presented the dwelling to Moses, the tent and all its furnishing, fastening hooks, frames, crossbars, posts, bases, tenting of tanned ram skins, tenting of dolphin skins, veil of the screen, chest of the testimony with its poles, an atonement cover, table with its utensils, the bread of the presence, lampstand of pure gold, and its lamps, all fitted out, and all its utensils, and the oil for the light, gold altar, anointing oil, fragrant incense, screen for the entrance to the tent, bronze altar with its bronze grate, its poles and all its utensils, wash basin and its base, hangings for the courtyard, its posts and bases, screen for the gate of the courtyard, its cords and its pegs, utensils for ministry in the dwelling, the tent of meeting, woven vestments for ministering in the sanctuary, sacred vestments for Aaron the priest and his sons when serving as priests. The Israelites completed all the work just as God had commanded Moses, so that they had done all the work and done it exactly as God had commanded. Moses blessed them. God spoke to Moses. On the first day of the first month, set up the dwelling, the tent of meeting. Place the chest of the testimony in it, and screen the chest with the curtain. Bring in the table and set it, arranging its lampstand and lamps. Place the gold altar of incense before the chest of the testimony, and hang the curtain at the door of the dwelling. Place the altar of whole burnt offering at the door of the dwelling, the tent of meeting. Place the wash basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and fill it with water. Set up the courtyard on all sides, and hang the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard. Then take the anointing oil and anoint the dwelling and everything in it. Consecrate it and all its furnishings so that it becomes holy. Anoint the altar of whole burnt offering and all its utensils, consecrating the altar so that it is completely holy. Anoint the wash basin and its base, consecrate it. Finally, bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. Dress Aaron in the sacred vestments, anoint him, set him apart to serve me as a priest. Bring his sons and put tunics on them, anoint them just as you anointed their father, to serve me as priests. Their anointing will bring them into a perpetual priesthood down through the generations. Moses did everything God commanded. He did it all. On the first day of the first month of the second year, the dwelling was set up. Moses set it up. He laid its bases, erected the frames, placed the crossbars, set the posts, spread the tent over the dwelling, and put the covering over the tent, just as God had commanded Moses. He placed the testimony in the chest, inserted the poles for carrying the chest, and placed the lid, the atonement cover, on it. He brought the chest into the dwelling and set up the curtain, screening off the chest of the testimony, just as God had commanded Moses. He placed the table in the tent of meeting on the north side of the dwelling, outside the curtain, and arranged the bread there before God, just as God had commanded him. He placed the lampstand in the tent of meeting opposite the table on the south side of the dwelling, and set up the lamps before God, just as God had commanded him. Moses placed the gold altar in the tent of meeting in front of the curtain, and burned fragrant incense on it, just as God had commanded him. He placed a screen at the entrance to the dwelling. He set the altar of whole burnt offering at the door of the dwelling, the tent of meeting, and offered up the whole burnt offerings and the grain offerings, just as God had commanded Moses. He placed the wash basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and filled it with water for washing. Moses and Aaron and his sons washed their hands and feet there. When they entered the tent of meeting, and when they served at the altar, they washed, just as God had commanded Moses. Finally, he erected the courtyard all around the dwelling and the altar, and put the screen for the courtyard entrance. Moses finished the work. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the dwelling. Moses couldn't enter the tent of meeting because the cloud was upon it, and the glory of God filled the dwelling. Whenever the cloud lifted from the dwelling, the people of Israel set out on their travels. But if the cloud did not lift, they wouldn't set out until it did lift. The cloud of God was over the dwelling during the day, and the fire was in it at night, visible to all the Israelites in their travels. The day the dwelling was set up, the cloud covered the dwelling of the tent of testimony. From sunset until daybreak, it was over the dwelling. It looked like fire. It was like that all the time. The cloud covered the dwelling, and at night looking like fire. When the cloud lifted above the tent, the people of Israel marched out, and when the cloud descended, the people camped. The people of Israel marched at God's command, and they camped at his command. As long as the cloud was over the dwelling, they camped. Even when the cloud hovered over the dwelling for many days, they honored God's command and wouldn't march out. They stayed in camp, obedient to God's command, as long as the cloud was over the dwelling. But the moment God issued orders, they marched. If the cloud stayed only from sunset to daybreak and then lifted at daybreak, they marched. Night or day, it made no difference. When the cloud lifted, they marched. It made no difference whether the cloud hovered the dwelling for 2 days or a month or a year. As long as the cloud was there, they were there. And when the cloud went up, they got up and marched. They camped at God's command, and they marched at God's command. They lived obediently by God's orders as delivered by Moses.